Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The village of Iduoma was a place where time seemed to move slower. Nestled between emerald hills and whispering streams, the people rose with the sun and retired with the stars, content in simplicity. That was where Obinna, the only son of a retired schoolteacher, met Ngozi, the daughter of the village's respected cassava farmer. From childhood, their friendship bloomed like wild hibiscus, innocent, sincere, and filled with shared laughter. As teenagers, their bond deepened. Every step she took echoed beside him, whether at the stream, in the market, or under the mango tree near her father's hut. She was radiant, not because of beauty in the way magazines defined it, but in how she carried kindness, how she helped elders without being asked, how she smiled even when there was little food at home. Obinna admired her from afar for years, until the day he watched her climb a palm tree barefoot to rescue a stranded goat, and he knew no other woman could ever match her strength. He was not a prince, but he was determined. After completing secondary school with excellent grades, Obinna declined a scholarship to the city. "My heart is in this village," he told his father. Instead, he ran youth programs, organized community cleanups, and became the youngest person to lead the town's agricultural committee. The people began calling him Oga Future. Ngozi watched him grow, and he watched her blossom. They would meet in secret by the stream, where she would wash clothes, and he would pretend to be reading a newspaper. On one of those quiet evenings, beneath the thick orange glow of sunset, he pulled out a thin, golden ring, not from any jewelry shop, but carved by a local blacksmith. Inside, it bore the words, "Forever yours." Oh, he held it up with trembling fingers. "I may not have much," he whispered, "but I'll build everything with you." Her tears were the only answer he needed. She wore the ring immediately, even though her father hadn't yet approved. It was no longer a question of if. It was when. Their families were thrilled. Everyone in Iduoma spoke about the match like it was heaven sent. Even the chief nodded with pride. Ngozi's pregnancy was discovered 2 moons later. She announced it with flushed cheeks and a bright smile, clutching her stomach during the morning market. Obinna carried her home on his back, shouting, "I am the happiest man in Nigeria." The town rejoiced. Wedding plans were fast-tracked. The community began contributing firewood, goats, and even fabric. That night, Ngozi and Obinna lay on a mat under the stars in front of her compound. "This child will know peace," she whispered, running her fingers along his cheek. He kissed her hand and looked into her eyes. "Not just peace. Our child will know greatness." In the distance, drums echoed. The union was written not just in the soil of the village, but in the sky above it. The morning of their wedding was a mosaic of vibrant colors, village songs, and the aroma of pounded yam and ogbono soup wafting through the air. Women dressed in geli and wrappers bustled around the compound, while the men decorated the venue with fresh palm fronds and colorful cloths. Ngozi was the center of it all, 6 months pregnant, glowing like a goddess carved out of sunlight. Her dress was simple but elegant, a mixture of ivory and gold, sewn by her best friend using borrowed fabric. The ring he gave her never left her hand, and that morning she kissed it with reverence. "Today I become your wife," she whispered, her voice shaky with joy. Obinna, wearing a white kaftan and red cap, stood across the field giving instructions to the drummers, checking the palm wine supply, and nervously practicing his speech. His eyes kept darting toward the sky, as if expecting it to open and rain blessings. "Let today come," he said to himself, "and may nothing stop it." But fate has a way of bleeding through joy when no one is watching. Just as the first dancers stepped into the circle, the skies darkened, not with rain, but with terror. Screams pierced the air like spears. Bandits dressed in black and red, faces masked, stormed the village. Bullets cracked through the sky, children wailed, pots shattered, and men ran with cutlasses in hand, futile against the guns. Obinna turned just in time to see his uncle fall, shot in the back while protecting a woman carrying firewood. He shouted for Ngozi, running barefoot across burning thatch, his hands bleeding. But the smoke was thick and chaos roared louder than drums. The last thing he saw before he was tackled and dragged into a hiding pit was Ngozi, struggling against two masked men, clutching her belly and crying, "Obinna, don't forget me." Then she vanished into the smoke. The raid lasted hours. Houses were looted, elders executed, and girls taken. It was not just random violence, this was organized. The attackers left behind a message carved on the wall of the chief's compound. No mayor from Iduoma. A rival political party, fearful that Obinna's popularity would elevate the village to power, had orchestrated a massacre. When silence finally returned, it was worse than the gunfire. The village was gone. Obinna emerged from his hiding place with shaking hands, his body covered in ash. He found Ngozi's wrapper near the burnt yam barn and collapsed to his knees. Her father was dead. Her mother had vanished. He clutched the ring box in his pocket and swore, by the heavens and earth, I will never stop searching for her, even if I die trying. The once joyful heart of Iduoma was now a graveyard of memories. Smoke still rose from the ruins 2 days after the raid. Obinna wandered the debris in silence, barefoot and shirtless, his lips parched and eyes swollen from crying. The laughter of children was replaced by the creak of fallen trees and the chirp of scavenging birds. His white kaftan was now black with soot, torn from clutching the ground and pulling bodies from the rubble. Each face he uncovered was someone he knew, the butcher who gifted him a goat for his wedding, the old woman who sang him lullabies as a boy, and finally, Ngozi's father, barely recognizable. He dropped beside the body, holding it as if it could still whisper answers. He buried him that evening with his bare hands and laid the torn wedding invitation on the grave. You raised an angel, he whispered, and they took her from me. Desperation took hold like fire in dry grass. He questioned the few survivors, bribed them with food and water for even the faintest clue. A child said he saw a pregnant woman crying in the back of a black truck. A wounded hunter claimed he followed the trail but lost them near the Mparo forest. Obinna sold his family's last plot of land and hired local vigilantes to search every path. Days bled into weeks. Nights offered no sleep. His skin darkened under the sun. His eyes lost their shine. The ring he once placed on Ngozi's finger was now on a chain around his neck, pressed against his chest like a shield of guilt. His once hopeful voice became hoarse from shouting her name across valleys. But there was never an answer. Only echoes. Only birds. Only silence. Eventually, the villagers began to give up. They whispered around him, avoiding eye contact. She's gone, some said. If she wasn't killed, she would have returned by now. The elders asked him to stop wasting money. The chief's widow pulled him aside and said, My son, no spirit stays when the body is gone. Let her rest. But Obinna wasn't ready. Not until one night, standing in the rain outside what remained of Ngozi's compound. He broke. He fell to his knees, the water drenching him as he screamed. I promised her. I gave her my word. The thunder answered him. That night, he buried the last hope he had under the mango tree they once sat beneath. But what he didn't know was that she was still alive. The days turned to weeks, and the weeks turned to painful months. Obinna refused to leave Iduoma, despite warnings from friends and political associates that staying there would destroy what remained of his mental state. He had stopped shaving, stopped smiling, and barely ate. Every day, he set out at dawn with hired men, returning by nightfall with nothing but more dirt on his boots and blood in his eyes. He ventured into thick forests, crossed shallow rivers, and interrogated broken villagers from neighboring communities. Whenever he heard a rumor that a pregnant woman was seen in chains or that someone escaped from the raid and lived, his heart would leap, only to be crushed again. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Ngozi was the rhythm in his blood, the air he breathed, the reason he once believed in hope. It wasn't long before whispers began spreading. Obinna has gone mad. He's chasing ghosts. Let the dead rest. The same people who once danced at his engagement began turning away when they saw him coming. Even the church elders advised him to mourn properly and move on. His political allies were growing concerned. He was a rising star, charismatic and intelligent, but this obsession with a lost woman was becoming a liability. Still, he ignored them all. He kept a small notebook filled with names of people he questioned, places he searched, and sightings reported. It was dog-eared, stained with tears and sweat. He prayed nightly, but even heaven felt silent. On a particularly dark evening, he met a man who claimed he followed the raiders' path through the Imo River swamp. "I saw a woman, swollen with child. They called her the Golden One," the man said. "But they vanished. Into the mountains. No one comes back from there." When Obinna returned to Iduoma that night, it began to rain. Not the kind that comes in sprinkles, but a downpour that washed away roads and drowned voices. He stood under the mango tree they once kissed beneath, soaked to the bone, holding the scarf Ngozi left behind. In that moment, he heard her laughter in the wind. Or maybe it was the madness. He screamed at the sky, asking God why he let her be taken, why he gave love only to snatch it away. "If she is dead," he cried, "then let me die too." But the only answer he received was thunder. With heavy feet, he walked into what was left of his father's house, collapsed on the cold floor, and sobbed like a child. That night, he decided to leave Iduoma, not because he had given up, but because he needed a different weapon, power. He realized no one would ever help him unless he climbed high enough to force the truth out. And so, drenched and broken, he took his first step toward politics. Ngozi woke up every morning not to sunlight, but to the clang of metal buckets and the smell of old sweat. The room they kept her in had no windows, just one wooden door with a lock that creaked like a dying man's last breath. It had been months since the raid, months since she last saw a tree or felt fresh air. She didn't know where she was exactly, only that it was deep in the forest, surrounded by armed guards and silence. Her baby bump was now a round burden, and her ankles were swollen from standing too long. She was forbidden from sitting unless ordered. Her once smooth skin bore whip marks and calluses. But she endured. Every time they beat her, every time they shouted threats in her ears, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Obinna will find me." It became her prayer, her shield. The captors, a coalition of rogue political agents and mercenaries, had decided she was too valuable to kill. Her beauty caught the eye of the boss, a nameless man who rarely spoke but always stared. He said she would become a trophy servant, one who would work inside rather than the fields. This only made her more miserable. She scrubbed floors with her bare hands, washed blood-stained clothes, and was tasked with boiling water for other women who were kept in far worse conditions. Some were too broken to speak. A few tried to escape and never returned. One night, Ngozi tried to slip through the wooden gate with a spoon she had hidden under her wrapper. She made it to the fence line before she was tackled, dragged by her braids, and beaten unconscious. When she awoke, they stood over her with a blade pressed to her belly. "Try it again," one hissed, "and we'll kill your child, not you." That night, Ngozi wept quietly, hiding her tears in a cloth. Her hands shook as she rubbed the curve of her stomach. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the baby. "You deserve more than this." The ring Obinna gave her was tied around her neck with a worn string. It was her only possession. She kissed it every morning and night. With no school, no books, and no community, she began reciting stories to herself. She imagined Obinna standing at the gates, sword in hand, declaring war on her captors. When hope faded, she created it. She began counting the months by scratching the wall with her fingernails. She kept track of time, even when her soul was losing grip. One day, while boiling yam for the guards, she looked into the hot water and whispered, "One day, my son will not grow up in chains." And deep inside her, the child kicked as if answering back. Chisholm entered the world not with celebration, but with silence. His cries echoed through the walls of the compound as Ngozi bit down on a rag to keep from alerting the guards during her labor. With no midwife or medical help, she gave birth alone on a cold mat, using only old water, torn wrappers, and instinct. When he emerged, she wept, not because of the pain, but because he was alive. Her chains were loosened for a week after that, just long enough for her to recover and start nursing him. But the guards made it clear, the boy belongs to us now. And from that moment, Chisholm was no longer just her child. He became property. As soon as he could walk, they began training him. He learned to run errands, carry buckets, and by age 5, was hawking sachet water on highways barefoot. She watched helplessly. She begged them to let him school, even if it meant staying within the compound. But they laughed. He's not going to be a governor's son, they said. He's a beggar's bastard. But Ngozi never let the insult break her. Every night, she waited until they fell asleep, then pulled her son close and drew the alphabet on the floor with charcoal. A is for Amma, she would whisper. B is for bread. C is for courage. The boy was bright, always asking questions. Who gave you the ring, Mama? Did Papa look like me? Why can't I play with the other children? Her answers were soft, always guarded. Your father was the bravest man in the world, she told him. One day he'll come for us. As the years passed, Chisholm became used to pain. He could dodge a slap faster than most grown men. His feet were like leather from the hot tar of the roads. He learned to sell more than the other kids by smiling, by pleading with drivers, by being charming. People pitied him, not knowing he was the son of the president's first love. Not knowing the golden ring around his neck had once symbolized a love story that shook a village. Ngozi kept the story alive with words, bedtime whispers, and a secret dream. When you grow up, she told him, you will be free. You will go to school, and you will find your father. He never asked why they were locked away. It was all he'd ever known. But one afternoon, after being slapped for returning late with leftover corn, Chisholm touched the ring again and made a vow. One day, I will leave this place. And when I do, I'll never forget Mama. Obinna left Iduoma with a heart hollowed by grief and a purpose burning like fire in his bones. He moved to the city, where politics wasn't just a career, it was survival. He knew he could never match the old families with generational wealth, but he had something more potent, pain and a reason. His speeches weren't polished like the elites. They were raw, truthful, filled with urgency. When he spoke of insecurity, his voice cracked with memory. When he talked about forgotten villages, he saw Ngozi's face. Slowly, people began to listen. His story became his campaign. I come from Ash, he would say, and I will not stop until no child cries the way we cried. Young people adored him. Communities embraced him. But politics in Nigeria was a game of bloody chess, and the closer he climbed to power, the more he realized that truth alone wasn't enough. His first real test came when a popular senator named Chief Edom, head of a powerful political coalition, summoned him privately. Obinna was suspicious but curious. The meeting took place in a luxurious mansion that smelled of imported wine and secrets. Chief Edom didn't waste time. You want to be governor? I can make that happen. But nothing is free. Obinna listened as the old man outlined his conditions: endorsement in exchange for loyalty, and eventually marriage to his only daughter, Miriam Edom, a London-trained economist with political influence and family backing. Obinna hesitated. He thought of Ngozi, of her laughter, of the ring she still wore. But he also knew that without power, he could never access the information, people, or resources to uncover what really happened during that raid. It was a bitter sacrifice. That night, he stared at the photo of Ngozi in his wallet before slipping it into the drawer. Forgive me, he whispered. This is for you. Their wedding was national news. Miriam was beautiful, poised, and carried herself like royalty. Obinna was called the people's governor, the man who rose from ashes to grace. But behind the smiling photos and choreographed receptions was a love that never existed. Obinna respected her, but he didn't know her. He couldn't. Miriam noticed the distance early, how he flinched when she touched him, how he stared out windows late at night, lost in a memory she could never compete with. She tried to seduce him, tried to provoke him, tried to win his heart with political advice and curated elegance. But nothing worked. He slept beside her, but dreamed of another. And while the nation praised their union as the merging of intellect and humility, only Obinna knew the truth. He had traded his soul for a seat at the table. But the seat was cold, and his heart still lived under a mango tree far from power. Miriam Edem was raised not just to marry a politician. She was groomed to become power itself. From age 12, her father made her attend strategy meetings, introduced her to political donors, and taught her how to read budget documents before she could even vote. She was brilliant, decisive, and understood the ruthless terrain of national politics. So when she married Obinna, she believed she was stepping into a partnership of greatness. But from the very first month it became clear, Obinna wasn't emotionally available. His past haunted him in ways she didn't fully understand. She tried at first to ignore the distance. After all, political marriages weren't always about love. But when he began missing dinners, avoiding conversations, and secretly returning from Iduoma visits with red eyes, she realized something else held his heart captive. Unlike Ngozi, Miriam wasn't soft. She was cold in calculation, but beautiful in presentation. She built her brand as the modern First Lady, initiating tech education for girls, holding press conferences, attending global summits, and receiving foreign dignitaries. The media loved her, poised, intelligent, always one step ahead. But behind the polished exterior was a woman quietly boiling with resentment. She gave Obinna everything: access to her father's resources, cover from political scandal, legitimacy in elite circles. Yet he looked at her like a stranger. When she tried to touch his hand, he would subtly shift. When she asked about the woman from his past, he would murmur, "It's long gone." But late at night, she saw him clutching a ring box or reading old notebooks. And she knew some part of him was still waiting for someone else. As the years passed, and they moved from the governor's lodge to the National Assembly, and then to the presidency, Miriam made peace with her role. If she couldn't have Obinna's love, she would have his position. She poured herself into strategic meetings, built alliances with senators and judges, and became more feared than respected. Her childless marriage was gossiped about in whispers, but no one dared question her influence. Still, late at night, she would watch her husband stare out their villa window, silent as stone, and wonder what kind of woman could hold a man so tightly without even being there. She began to loathe the ghost that haunted him. And worse, she began to fear the day that ghost might return. Because if she ever did, Miriam knew Obinna would burn the entire country to bring her home. The day Obinna was sworn in as President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the nation erupted in celebration. Streets overflowed with cheering crowds. Fireworks lit up the night sky. His victory was a symbol of what was possible, that a man from a small, destroyed village could rise above tragedy and carry an entire nation forward. International media called it the people's win, a modern-day David beating decades of Goliaths. But while the cameras flashed and hands clapped, Obinna's smile remained hollow. Every speech he gave was flawless. Every policy, reform, security, infrastructure, youth empowerment, came with immediate impact. He became known for stabilizing the East, breaking terrorist cells, and recovering stolen funds. But the more power he gained, the more distant he felt from himself. It was as though the seat he now occupied came with a price tag his soul could barely afford. Inside Asa Rock, the presidential villa, Obinna was both admired and feared. He was a man of few words, always composed, never overstepping. But his staff noticed how he lingered in the garden after press briefings, or how he stared at old files marked Iduoma Raid closed. Every month, he sent out anonymous searches, requesting updates on women rescued from human trafficking, never telling anyone why. Miriam had long stopped asking questions. Their marriage had reduced to ceremonial gestures and obligatory appearances. Obinna's closest confidant, a former army general named Dinladi, knew something haunted him. "You've built an empire," Dinladi once said, "but you're still chasing a shadow." Obinna didn't deny it. He simply looked away and whispered, "Some ghosts wear a face you can never forget." Then came the fateful day, the road commissioning in Umuol, a small rural town bordering the region where the raid once began. It was supposed to be routine: cut the ribbon, give a speech, shake hands. But as Obinna's convoy pulled through the crowd, a barefoot boy hawking corn weaved through the traffic, knocking on windows. And then Obinna saw it. Hanging from the boy's neck on a worn string was the ring, his ring. The ring he gave to Ngozi years ago, engraved with "Forever Yours." Oh. The president's world tilted. His vision blurred. His heart pounded against his chest. "Stop the car," he shouted. But his voice was drowned by sirens. The boy, startled, saw the security guards rush forward and bolted into the crowd. Obinna stepped out, calling after him, "Wait, wait." But it was too late. The child vanished. That night, the most powerful man in the country lay in bed next to his wife and could not sleep. Because somewhere out there, the past had come back wearing small feet and selling corn. The ride back to the presidential villa was unusually silent. Obinna's security detail noticed the change in him immediately. He didn't respond to questions. He didn't acknowledge the governor's gratitude. His eyes remained locked on the streets they had just left, like he was hoping the boy would reappear and explain everything. When they reached Osso Rock, he ignored the staff waiting to debrief him and walked straight into his study, locking the door. He placed his head in his hands and trembled. That ring, his ring, the one he had carved with the village blacksmith all those years ago, the one he slid onto Ngozi's finger with trembling hands on the eve of their wedding, the one he believed lost in the ashes of Iduoma, was now hanging from the neck of a boy no older than 9. The details haunted him, the way the string was worn thin, as though it had been worn for years, the boy's sun-darkened skin, his cautious eyes, the look of someone used to running. Obinna tried to sleep that night, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ngozi, pregnant, reaching for him in the smoke, crying for help as the bandits dragged her away. He had tried so hard to bury the pain, but it had never left. Not really. He thought of the boy's face, a mix of innocence and hunger. There was something in that child's expression that mirrored Ngozi's gentleness. Was it just coincidence? Or could it be possible? The ring was unique. He hadn't made a duplicate. And Ngozi had worn it religiously. He began pacing, talking to himself, replaying every possibility. Could she be alive? Could the boy be his son? Had she escaped? Or worse, was she being kept somewhere, suffering, enslaved while he sat in the country's highest office, unaware? His heart clenched. He couldn't breathe. And yet, he couldn't speak a word to Miriam. She noticed his unrest, asked questions, but he brushed her off with a forced smile. She wasn't part of this story. She never was. By morning, Obinna had made a decision. He would not let this slip through his fingers. Not this time. He summoned General Dunladi and 2 trusted aides to his private study and shut the door behind them. "What I'm about to say," he began, "never leaves this room." He told them everything, from the ring to the woman named Ngozi, from the day of the raid to the boy he saw hawking corn. Dunladi was stunned, but not skeptical. He had seen enough during his years in service to know that some truths survive even when logic says they shouldn't. "Find that boy," Obinna ordered. "Use everything. I want him alive. I want him safe. And I want no one, not the press, not the First Lady, not even the governors, to know a thing." Dunladi nodded. The search began that day, and for the first time in years, the president wasn't thinking about the economy or opposition parties. He was thinking about a barefoot boy with a ring that shouldn't exist, and the woman he might still call his. For days, the villa buzzed with unspoken tension. Obinna's schedule was rearranged to allow private time, though only a few knew what that meant. In truth, the president was no longer focused on national briefings or economic memos. His thoughts were consumed by the unknown boy. Dunladi and his team swept through Yumuel and nearby towns quietly, using plainclothes agents and civilian scouts. They questioned hawkers, bribed local beggars, and examined CCTV footage from surrounding roads. Obinna checked infrequently, but cautiously. His body remained in the office, but his mind stayed at that roadside, searching. At night, he stared at the ceiling, his hands clasped over his chest where the old ring box used to lie years ago. He had locked it away when he married Miriam, promising to forget, but now it seemed foolish. The ghosts he thought he'd buried were breathing again, stronger than ever. Miriam noticed. At first, she thought it was stress. Politics was a cruel game, and Obinna had weathered many storms. But this time, it was different. He barely touched his food. He no longer spoke in full sentences around her. He avoided their bedroom, often choosing to sleep in the study under the guise of late-night work. One evening, she walked in on him holding a torn photo, a young girl with braids smiling beside him, one hand over a barely visible baby bump. Miriam felt her stomach twist. She had always known there was another woman, but this kind of grief, was something she had never been prepared for. "Oh, Binna," she said softly, "what is happening to you?" He looked up at her, and for a second, she saw pain so deep it made her step back. But he said nothing, just lowered the photo and whispered, "Nothing you'd understand." Meanwhile, Chisholm, unaware that the country's president was hunting for him, continued hawking corn along the same roads. His mother, Ngozi, had noticed he'd become quieter, distracted even. "What is it?" she asked one evening, as they boiled yam over a fire. "Did something happen on the road?" Chisholm hesitated, then nodded. "A man came out of a big car," he said. "He shouted at me. He looked scared or sad. I think he was looking at the ring." Ngozi froze. Her fingers trembled. She touched the ring tied around his neck and closed her eyes. "What did he look like?" she asked. "Tall, like a pastor, but serious." She opened her eyes and stared into the fire. "Next time," she whispered, "if you ever see him again, don't run." That night, while the other women in captivity slept on cold mats, Ngozi sat in the corner, her arms around her knees, and dared to hope for the first time in years. Was it possible? Could he still be alive? It was 2 weeks after the encounter when Dunladi's team finally found Chisholm. He was selling roasted plantain beside a junction, eyes darting around for police, his feet blistered from walking long distances daily. One of the agents approached gently, pretending to be a traveler. "What's your name, boy?" Chisholm hesitated. "Chisholm." The man smiled. "That's a good name. Do you wear that ring for luck?" The moment the man mentioned the ring, Chisholm backed away. He had been warned. His mother told him never to talk about it to strangers. But the agent wasn't forceful. He simply handed him a bottle of water and said, "If someone wanted to find your mother, would you help them?" The boy froze. "Why?" The agent replied, "Because she may know someone who misses her." That night, they followed Chisholm back from a distance and noted the compound, the run-down building, the iron fence, the rusted gates. They didn't enter. They just took photographs. The next morning, Obinna was shown the images. His hands shook as he pointed to a woman hanging laundry in the background. "Zoom in," he whispered. "That's her." When they brought Chisholm into the villa 2 days later, it wasn't through the main entrance. Obinna met him in a secure garden surrounded by silence. He knelt before the boy, taking in every detail, the skinny frame, the hardened feet, the alert eyes. "I saw you," Obinna said. "I think you may know someone I once loved." Chisholm nodded slowly. "Mama said a man gave her this ring," he replied, showing the worn gold. "She said he loved her before she was taken. She said he promised to never leave." Obinna's heart broke wide open. He removed his glasses, covering his face with his hand, tears flowing freely. "What's your mother's name?" he asked. The boy replied, "Her name is Ngozi." The name was a key turning in a lock. Obinna leaned back, sobbing into his palms. "She's alive," he whispered. "She's alive." Chisholm watched in silence. This strange man in a suit, powerful, broken, crying like a child. "Are you my uncle?" he asked innocently. Obinna laughed through his tears and shook his head. "No, my son. I'm your father." The words were heavier than thunder. Chisholm blinked. He wasn't sure if it was a trick, but something in the man's eyes told him it was real. "Where is she?" Obinna asked, holding his hand. "I need to see her." Chisholm hesitated. "They won't let her go. They say if we try to run, they'll hurt her." Obinna stood. "Not anymore," he said, voice like steel. "No one will ever touch her again." That night, he gave Dunladi the order to prepare a rescue mission. Quiet, swift, and absolute. Miriam knocked on the study door around midnight, but he didn't answer. His eyes were on a photo of Ngozi once more, this time, with hope instead of grief. The time had come. The night before the rescue mission, Obinna sat alone in the chapel within the presidential villa, lit only by a single flickering candle. It had been years since he prayed like this, not as a politician performing for cameras, not as a national leader offering ceremonial blessings, but as a broken man, a grieving lover, and now a father begging heaven for mercy. "Let her still be alive," he whispered, voice trembling. "Let her see freedom again. Let me hold her, not in memory, but in truth." He touched the ring that once meant everything, now returned to him by fate through a child he didn't know existed. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. Would she recognize him? Would she forgive him for giving up the search? For marrying another? For letting power bury the promise he once swore beneath a mango tree? By morning, Dimladi had assembled a small, elite unit, loyal soldiers who had been with Obinna since his early days as governor. No media, no public announcement, no red tape, just men with quiet eyes, trained hands, and a mission to end captivity. They set out before dawn, guided by maps, satellite imagery, and Chisholm's memory of landmarks, a crooked tree, a yellow truck, a cracked wall with graffiti that read, "We own your blood." The compound was buried deep in the bush, surrounded by rusted fences and broken dreams. As they approached, the silence was thick with tension. Obinna stayed behind in an armored vehicle, but his eyes never left the live surveillance feed. His heart pounded violently as the team breached the gates. Gunfire erupted. Men shouted, but his voice cut through the radio. "Don't harm any women. Don't hurt the innocent. Just bring her out alive." After 20 minutes that felt like 20 years, the radio crackled. "Target secured. She's alive." Obinna didn't hear the rest. He bolted from the vehicle and ran towards the backup unit meeting point. When the doors opened and he saw her, frail, pale, covered in dust and bruises, but still unmistakably Ngozi, he collapsed to his knees. At first, she didn't recognize him. She blinked slowly, unsure if it was real or another cruel dream. But when he called her name, his voice cracked and full of emotion. Her legs gave way. "Obinna," she gasped. He rushed to catch her. They held each other like survivors of a storm that had raged for over a decade. The soldiers looked away in reverence. There were no cameras, no press releases. Just two people reunited by the stubborn will of fate, one who never truly forgot, and the other who never truly gave up, even when the world said she was gone. The compound Ngozi had lived in for over 10 years was more than just a prison. It was a graveyard of identities, a fortress of pain buried under walls that had never known sunlight. The women inside had stopped using their real names. Most didn't even remember the villages they came from. Every day was survival: boil water, clean floors, serve food, avoid punishment. The guards were ruthless and corrupt, but even they had underestimated the fire still buried inside Ngozi. She hadn't just survived. She had kept her mind intact, preserved her dignity through the scars, and secretly raised her son to be better than his surroundings. But after Obinna held her for the first time in years and whispered, "You're safe now," she couldn't respond. She passed out from shock, starvation, and exhaustion. Her body had endured beyond its limit, but her spirit had waited only for this moment to collapse. They transported her to a private medical facility under heavy security. No press, no protocols, just the silence of machines and beeping monitors. Obinna stayed by her bedside, refusing to leave. His security team rotated in shifts. Chisholm, now bathed, fed, and sleeping in the adjacent room, would come in occasionally, whispering, "Mama," just to see her chest rise. The doctors said she was malnourished but stable. Her body would heal. Her mind, however, would take time. During one of her waking moments, Ngozi reached for the ring, still tied around her neck. "I never took it off," she said weakly. Obinna wept. He kissed her hands, her forehead, her cheeks. "I searched Ngozi. I swear I did. I thought you were dead. I failed you." She shook her head. "You didn't. You kept your promise. You found me." As days passed, she began to talk, slowly, softly, about the years lost. She spoke of women who died beside her, of babies born and buried in silence, of lashes that tore her skin but not her soul. "They wanted to break me," she whispered, "but I remembered your voice. I remembered our child. That's how I lived." Obina, now president of a country that thought it knew him, sat in awe of the woman who had suffered in silence while he stood before cameras and waved to crowds. For the first time since his inauguration, he felt like a man, not a leader. And this woman, ragged, scarred, and utterly majestic, was still his. But even as their hearts began to beat in sync again, danger loomed beyond the hospital walls. Because while he had found her, others had noticed her return. And Miriam had already begun asking questions. Miriam had always been observant, more than her husband ever gave her credit for. She noticed the shift immediately. Obina canceled all public events for a week without explanation. His meetings were moved, his calls unreturned. At first, she assumed it was health. But then she noticed how the staff whispered in corners, how his private security became tighter, how the head of his household team refused to look her in the eye. That was when she began to dig. And when she learned that a young boy had been brought to the villa under secret transport, her instinct screamed. The name Ngozi was whispered once, just once, by an aide who didn't know Miriam was standing behind the corridor. It was all she needed. She returned to her room, shut the door, and stared at her reflection. So the dead had returned. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. Miriam Edem Nwosu wasn't built like that. Her rage was cold, sharp, and deeply focused. She began working her contacts in the press, slowly leaking distractions to buy herself time, a new scandal about another senator, a rumor of economic failure in the West. Anything to keep eyes off the villa. But inside she was boiling. He never loved me, she thought. He never tried. He married me for power, but he never once gave me his soul. And now, after all these years, the ghost he claimed to bury had come back in flesh and blood. And worst of all, with a child, a living heir, a boy who would soon call himself the president's son. She sat at her dressing table, her manicured fingers trembling as she reached for her phone. "Get me everything you can find on her," she texted her fixer. Where she was kept, who rescued her, and who knew about it. Meanwhile, Obina remained unaware. He had just moved Ngozi and Chisholm into a secured villa, a private property in the hills, guarded by his most trusted men. He wanted peace for them, a new life. He told Chisholm he would begin proper school next term, and Ngozi would have a team of therapists and doctors. But he didn't tell Miriam. Not yet. He didn't know how. Or, maybe, he just didn't care anymore. His heart was no longer with her. It never truly was. He had found the woman he lost. And now his only goal was to rebuild what time and wicked men had tried to destroy. But in the shadows of that very victory, Miriam plotted. Not with guns or soldiers, but with secrets, influence, and the cold cruelty of a woman scorned. She wouldn't strike yet. Not until she knew exactly who she was fighting. But one thing was certain. Ngozi had returned, and nothing in the villa would ever be the same again. The reunion between Ngozi and Chisholm in the safe villa was nothing short of sacred. She had seen him grow up under the shadow of fear, his innocence bruised by labor and poverty. Now in clean clothes, freshly bathed and smiling, he looked different, not because his face had changed, but because safety had returned to his eyes. As he ran into her arms, crying "Mama," over and over, Ngozi fell to her knees and wept freely. Her arms wrapped around him as if afraid someone would pull him away again. She kissed his forehead, cupped his cheeks, and whispered in a broken voice, "You're free now, my son. You're safe." Obina stood nearby, overwhelmed, watching the two pieces of his heart finally collide into one. For years he had mourned them both, a lover and a child he didn't know existed. But here they were, breathing and alive. As the days passed, the villa became a space of slow healing. Chisholm, curious and energetic, would explore every room with awe, sometimes asking questions that made both his parents laugh and cry at once. "Is this really our house? Can I really go to school now? Papa, are you really the president?" Obina had to adjust to the unfamiliar weight of the word Papa, but when it came, it filled every hollow part of his chest. He took time away from official duties, appointing his vice president as acting head for the week, while he stayed close to Ngozi and Chisholm. They talked for hours, about the years lost, about the lives they'd built separately, and the wounds they were still carrying. Ngozi spoke of chains, hunger, silence, and the memory of his voice that kept her alive. Obinna spoke of guilt, power, loneliness, and the ache that no presidency could cure. One evening, under the stars in the villa's quiet courtyard, Obinna brought out a small velvet box. Ngozi's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a gold ring, the exact replica of the one she still wore on a string. This time, it had both their initials. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said, voice cracking. "Not about you. Not about us. I don't care what the world says, what the headlines will scream. I made you a promise before God and man, and I intend to keep it. Will you wear this again?" Ngozi stared at him, tears streaming, and for a moment, time rewound. She wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't the president. They were just two people under a mango tree again. She nodded, and he slid the ring onto her finger. Their lips met for the first time in years, and though their kiss was gentle, it carried the fire of everything they had endured to reach this moment. Miriam sat in the private wing of the presidential villa, scrolling through confidential photos sent by her fixer. The image of Ngozi walking out of the hospital, supported by Obinna, dressed in plain clothes but visibly glowing with health, made Miriam's grip tighten around her phone. Her lips curled into a tight line as she flipped through more. Obinna escorting Chisholm to a bookstore, their hands locked like father and son. Another of Ngozi smiling while seated in the courtyard of the villa she now lived in. Her villa, purchased years ago under a shell company to avoid suspicion. It was one thing to hear rumors. It was another to see the reality unfold in digital proof. What infuriated Miriam most wasn't the betrayal. It was the calmness with which Obinna had done it. No lies. No cover-ups. He simply replaced her emotionally and quietly, like she never mattered. She stormed into his office unannounced. "So this is it," she snapped, throwing printed photos on his desk. "You think because you're president you can disrespect me? Hide your bastard son in my own house." Obinna looked at her, tired but composed. "Lower your voice, Miriam. There's a child involved." Her laugh was cold. "You care now? You never even tried with me. You gave me titles, not love. And now you bring this woman from the dead like a resurrected queen." He stood, his voice firm. "She was never dead to me. You knew that. You married a man who loved another woman, and you used it for power. You made your choice, and so did I." Her hands trembled. "You think the world will let this pass? That your enemies won't twist this? That I won't?" He stared into her eyes. "Let them try. I have nothing left to fear." That night, Miriam didn't sleep. She paced her room like a lioness in a burning cage. Her marriage had been built on strategy and status, but in public, she was still the first lady, dignified, untouchable. Now that position was being threatened by a village girl who had been presumed dead, and worse, a child who might be seen as the legitimate heir to Obinna's legacy. It wasn't just personal, it was political. Miriam knew what power did to people. It corrupted. It seduced. It destroyed. And Ngozi's return could unravel everything. Alliances, loyalties, even upcoming elections. If Obinna dared bring her back into public life, if he dared acknowledge Chisholm, Miriam knew she'd be forced to act. But she wouldn't use guns. She'd use the same tools she'd always used: media, fear, whispers, and manipulation. She smiled faintly in the dark. Let them enjoy their little reunion. It wouldn't last. As the days turned into weeks, Ngozi began to heal physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Yet, her nights were still plagued with memories. She would often wake up in cold sweat, reaching for her son to make sure he was beside her. Sometimes she cried silently in the bathroom, gripping the edge of a sink as she stared at her reflection, wondering how she had survived it all. Obinna would find her like that and say nothing. He would simply wrap his arms around her until she stopped shaking. They no longer needed words to understand each other. Their pain spoke fluently in silence. But even in safety, she bore hidden wounds, the guilt of the women she left behind, the nights she prayed to die, and the fear that everything she had regained could still be taken away in a heartbeat. Chisholm began school, a private institution where he was driven each day under protection. He took to learning quickly, dazzling his teachers with how much he had absorbed despite never stepping into a classroom. "Mama taught me," he told them proudly. He didn't brag about who his father was. In fact, he never spoke about it to anyone at school. But he noticed that everywhere he went, people stood straighter, smiled nervously, and whispered. He didn't understand politics, but he understood tension. One afternoon he asked Obinna, "Will they take us away again?" Obinna knelt, cupping his face. "No one will ever take you from me. I promise." But inside, he knew the question wasn't foolish. The world they were in was not built for peace, and the war was quietly brewing beyond their walls. Behind closed doors, journalists began poking around. Whispers of a mystery woman seen with the president. Photos from the hospital leaked to a low-level blog, then quickly taken down, but not before screenshots were saved. Obinna's team tried to control the narrative, but Miriam's influence was strong. She had friends in the media, in foreign embassies, even in the church. The country didn't yet know Ngozi's name, but the winds were changing. And Obinna knew that soon he'd be forced to choose between secrecy and truth. He sat on his private balcony one night, watching Ngozi and Chisholm laugh in the garden below, and he whispered to himself, "Let them come. Let them ask. I will not be ashamed of the people I love." But deep down he also knew the most dangerous war wasn't fought with bullets, it was fought with lies. The deeper Obinna dug into the past, the more disturbing his findings became. Official records from the raid on Iduoma were incomplete. Some files were entirely missing. Others were riddled with contradictions. Reports stating the bandits were mere criminals, while another hinted at a militia connected to a northern politician with old grudges. He assigned a quiet investigation through Dunladi, instructing him to track down former intelligence agents, survivors, and any living witness with even a whisper of knowledge about the attack. What emerged chilled him. The raid wasn't just random violence. It was politically motivated, a message to silence Iduoma's rise. A calculated assault designed to eliminate him before his career began. And someone in government, someone close, had helped cover it up. The mastermind was still unknown, but the trail pointed to a name hidden behind layers of favors and immunity. Obinna sat alone in his study late one night, surrounded by redacted documents and photographs. He couldn't shake the thought. Was it someone in his cabinet? Someone in his party? The idea that he had unknowingly dined with the man who ruined his life, who orchestrated Ngozi's abduction, who caused the deaths of half his village, was more than maddening. It was terrifying. Miriam had grown unusually quiet in recent days, and it only added to his discomfort. Her silence wasn't peaceful, it was loaded. He knew her well enough to recognize the stillness before storm. Yet he couldn't afford to confront her without proof. Not yet. So he played the role of the calm president, the composed husband, the steady leader, while beneath the surface he was preparing for war. Dunladi returned with one final whisper, a name buried in financial records, connected to mercenaries who'd operated in the East the week of the raid. Senator Uche MBA, a man who once worked with Chief Edom, Miriam's father. Obinna's heart dropped. Senator MBA had been one of the men who pushed for his marriage to Miriam, promising funding and media support. The same man who gifted them a villa after their wedding. Suddenly, it all made sense, the alliance, the pressure, the marriage. It hadn't just been about politics. It was about silencing the past. Obinna stood from his chair, his fists clenched. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was treason. And someone, somewhere, had used his wife as a pawn, maybe even a willing one. As dawn broke, he walked to the villa window and stared at the quiet courtyard where Ngozi and Chisholm were watering flowers. "You survived their hatred," he whispered. "Now I will destroy their silence." The morning sun painted golden light across the white walls of the villa. Ngozi stood in front of the mirror, gently adjusting her scarf. Her fingers lingered over the new ring on her hand, the same symbol of love that once carried her through years of darkness. Only now, it wasn't a memory of what was lost. It was a promise renewed. She had come to terms with the reality of her new world. No longer the captive, no longer forgotten, no longer voiceless. But even in freedom, she remained cautious. There were people who still saw her as a threat, not just because of her connection to Obinna, but because she represented a truth too painful to hide, a truth that had survived death, abuse, and decades of deception. That morning, Obinna joined her quietly. "We'll make it through this," he said, "no matter what comes." But something had already come. That afternoon, as they were preparing to take Chisholm for a private school tour, Obinna received an urgent file. A popular news outlet, one Miriam's foundation had quietly supported for years, had published a breaking story. President's secret family hidden in the hills? The article included a blurred photo of Ngozi at the hospital, a close-up of Chisholm holding his father's hand, and an anonymous quote from a senior government source suggesting a scandalous affair during Obinna's governorship. Obinna's press secretary called in a panic. Opposition leaders were already demanding an inquiry. Foreign diplomats were quietly asking questions. Miriam, of course, remained silent, her fingerprints expertly wiped from the entire thing. But Obinna knew. This wasn't just a media leak. It was a declaration of war. That night, Obinna returned to the secured villa. Ngozi sat on the couch, holding the ring and reading the online article. Chisholm was asleep in the next room. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She looked at him and asked, "What now?" He walked to her, dropped to one knee, and held her hands. "Now," he said, "we tell the truth. To the world. On our terms." She nodded slowly. "Are you ready for the consequences?" He kissed her hands and whispered, "I've been ready since the day I lost you. And I'm not losing you again." Outside the villa, the wind picked up, rustling the trees like a warning. The love they rekindled was real. But the enemies they now faced were powerful, some wearing suits, others wearing smiles. Yet even amid the danger, they had something no throne, no scandal, no power broker could erase: the ring and the vow it still carried. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.